The CO2 Hoax. Climate change has been a gradual and ongoing process, but its recognition as a supposed significant global problem gained momentum just over the last few decades. Scientists like John Tyndall in the 19th century began to study the role of greenhouse gases in trapping heat and affecting the Earth's temperature. In the mid-20th century, Charles David Keeling's measurements of atmospheric carbon dioxide levels at Mauna Loa Observatory in Hawaii showed a clear upward trend. 1970s to 1980s, concerns about the environmental impact of human activities, including the burning of fossil fuels, gained prominence. 1988, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC, was established by the United Nations to assess scientific information about climate change. This marked a formal recognition of the issue by the international community. The Kyoto Protocol, 1997. The Kyoto Protocol was adopted, aiming to set legally binding emission reduction targets for developed countries. This marked a significant step towards international cooperation on climate change mitigation. Al Gore's documentary, An Inconvenient Truth, 2006, brought the issue to a wider audience. In the documentary, Gore presented various scenarios related to climate change, including the melting of ice caps and glaciers, which could contribute to rising sea levels over time. In a 2009 comment, he stated that the North Pole would be ice-free by summer 2013. Paris Agreement, 2015. The Paris Agreement, adopted in 2015, saw nearly all nations commit to limiting global warming to well below 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. This agreement highlighted the urgency of addressing climate change on a global scale. Climate change and CO2, promoted by the eco-anxiety community, as a pressing issue with severe and diverse impacts, including more frequent and intense extreme weather events, rising sea levels, and disruptions to ecosystems and economies. The doubling of CO2 will cause the extinction of species, the ice caps to melt, and the rise of the oceans, threatening millions of people around the world. The question is it true? In fact, doubling CO2 levels will cause the greening of the Earth, enabling the feeding of a growing Earth's population. Fossil fuels has allowed us to reduce deaths due to climate, extended life expectancy, and improved the quality of life around the world. History and carbon dioxide levels. Throughout Earth's history, carbon dioxide, CO2 levels have varied significantly due to natural processes and geological events. During the Cambrian period, around 500 million years ago, CO2 concentrations were much higher than today, possibly ranging from 4,000 to 5,000 parts per million, ppm. These high CO2 levels were due to increased volcanic activity and the limited presence of land plants. During the Permian period, around 298 to 252 million years ago, CO2 levels declined, reaching around 200 ppm, rising again during the Mesozoic era, which includes the time of the dinosaurs. CO2 concentrations during this era were estimated to be around 1,000 to 2,000 ppm. However, by the late Cretaceous period, around 100 million years ago, CO2 levels began to decrease, likely due to increased weathering and the spreading of land plants. By the late Eocene epoch, around 34 million years ago, CO2 levels had dropped to around 600 to 800 ppm, but they remained relatively low compared to earlier periods, averaging around 400 ppm. By the time of the Ice Ages and interglacial periods, CO2 levels were lower, ranging from 180 to 280 ppm to around 280 to 300 ppm. Do you get the picture? Over time, CO2 levels have radically varied without man's involvement. Feeding the growing Earth's population, plants require carbon dioxide, CO2, for photosynthesis, a process through which they produce energy by converting CO2 and sunlight into sugars and oxygen. At 150 ppm, the plants begin to respire, and photosynthesis is stopped. At this low level, the plant will no longer be able to obtain CO2 from the atmosphere, and photosynthesis is restricted, and photosynthesis will stop, and the plant will die. At that level, all life on Earth will stop, including the human race. The optimum level of CO2 for plant photosynthesis is about 600 ppm. Doubling the CO2 from present levels benefit plants. So global warming is not as bad as the eco-anxiety community proclaim. A higher concentration of carbon dioxide in our atmosphere would aid photosynthesis, which in turn contribute to increased plant growth, causing the greening of the Earth, enabling the feeding of a growing Earth's population. Industrial Revolution to the present. The widespread burning of fossil fuels during the Industrial Revolution, late 18th century onwards, is thought to be the prime cause of a significant shift in CO2 levels. Since then, CO2 concentrations have risen dramatically, particularly, it is thought, because of the combustion of fossil fuels like coal, oil, and natural gas. As of September 2021, atmospheric CO2 levels are at 415 ppm. Flawed modeling predicts environmental disaster. Back in 1998, a little-known climate scientist named Michael Mann and two colleagues published a paper that sought to reconstruct the planet's past temperatures going back half a millennium before the era of thermometers, thereby showing just how out of whack recent warming has been. The results were what have come to be called the hockey stick environmental graph. The hockey stick environmental graph was featured prominently in the 2001 report by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC. It showed a long period of relatively stable temperatures followed by a sharp increase in temperatures during the 20th century, resembling the shape of a hockey stick. The hockey stick graph played a significant role in raising public awareness about the issue of climate change and the potential impact of human activities. However, the graph faced scrutiny and criticism from climate skeptics and scientists who questioned the methodology and data used. The inconvenient truth. The eco-anxiety community has been very successful in convincing governments that man-made CO2 is the main cause of global warming, while suppressing contrary thought. Fortunately, there is scientific data that shows that climate is more complex than what the eco-anxiety community would have you believe. Climate change is driven by many factors including the sun, submarine volcanism, and water vapor, clouds, which are not clearly understood or modeled and therefore ignored. Man-made CO2 is a minor contributor. The sun. The sun drives the weather, ocean currents, seasons, climate, and makes plant life possible through photosynthesis. Without the sun's heat and light, life on Earth would not exist. Subtle changes in Earth's orbit around the sun are responsible for the comings and goings of the ice ages. There is mounting evidence suggesting that the sun's 11-year solar cycle can affect climate and temperatures. The most famous example is Europe's Little Ice Age, when the sun went through several nearly sun-spotless cycles from 1645 to 1715. The eco-anxiety community tries to downplay the sun's role in climate change, and the significant role of the sun's solar cycle can have on the physics and chemistry of Earth's atmosphere. Submarine volcanism. 70% of the Earth's surface is covered by water. Ocean currents act much like a conveyor belt, transporting warm water and precipitation from the equator toward the poles and cold water from the poles back to the tropics. A more plausible driver of climate change is from the more than 5,000 submarine volcanoes on the ocean floor caused by the continually distorted Earth's crust due to a varying gravitational field. Submarine volcanism involves the eruption of molten rock and gases on the ocean floor. These eruptions can release various gases, including water vapor, sulfur dioxide, SO2, methane, CH4, and CO2. Submarine volcanism is able to and causes a significant element of global climate change, capable of initiating and driving the sudden interglacial warmings of the ice age cycles driven by orbital forcing. Added to the submarine volcanoes emitting CO2 are the active land volcanoes. It is difficult to give an exact count, however, on the average. There are around 50 to 70 active volcanoes erupting each year. The exact contribution of CO2 from submarine volcanism and volcanoes to the Earth's atmosphere is still an area of ongoing research and debate, but it is significant. Water vapor. Clouds. Clouds play a complex and significant role in the Earth's climate system, and their interactions with climate change are still an area of active research and ongoing study. Clouds can reflect sunlight back into space, which has a cooling effect on the Earth's surface. This is known as the albedo effect. Clouds with higher albedo reflect more sunlight and contribute to cooling the planet. On the other hand, clouds also act as a blanket, trapping some of the heat radiated from the Earth's surface. This is particularly true for low-altitude clouds, which can have a warming effect. Clouds absorb and re-emit infrared radiation, which contributes to the greenhouse effect. Clouds are formed from water vapor that condenses into tiny water droplets or ice crystals. The amount of water vapor in the atmosphere is influenced by temperature, and as the climate warms, the atmosphere can hold more moisture. This can lead to changes in cloud cover and cloud types. Positive feedback loops can occur where warming leads to more moisture in the atmosphere, which leads to more cloud formation, which in turn amplifies the warming. Cloud-climate interactions are among the largest sources of uncertainty in climate models. Small changes in cloud cover, altitude, and properties can lead to significant variations in their overall climate impact. Weather versus climate. Weather refers to the short-term and often rapidly changing atmospheric conditions, while climate pertains to the long-term, stable patterns of weather in a specific region. Weather conditions can change rapidly and are influenced by various factors, including air pressure systems, ocean currents, and seasonal variations. Climate change is associated with global shifts in temperature and precipitation, and it is a subject of concern due to its potential environmental and societal impacts. The eco-anxiety community frequently uses abrupt changes in weather, like hurricanes, to infer changes in climate. Weather patterns over a short period of time, days, weeks, or months, are not indicative of climate change. Weather and climate are distinct concepts, and changes in weather do not provide direct evidence of shifts in climate. The temperature of the Earth is rising. Given the overwhelming scientific evidence and consensus among climate scientists, the rise in recorded temperatures worldwide is considered a clear indicator of ongoing climate change. False. The problem is that many temperature sensors used to measure Earth's temperature are located in urban centers. These sensors are part of weather monitoring networks and meteorological stations, which are often concentrated in urban areas for practical reasons. Urban centers are often referred to as temperature hot spots due to a phenomenon known as the urban heat island, UHI effect. The UHI effect is characterized by higher temperatures in urban areas compared to their surrounding rural or natural environments. When these sensors are not included, there is no rise in the historical average of Earth's temperature. In fact, global temperatures are going down even with the rise of CO2. The eco-anxiety community. The eco-anxiety community would have you believe that climate change is mainly due to the use of man-made hydrocarbons, by ignoring discussions or modeling of the other major sources of CO2. Their rationale for this is that these sources are not clearly understood, requiring further study. Of course, if you eliminate all the primary sources of CO2, leaving only man-made sources, you are going to come up with the false conclusion that man-made CO2 is the primary cause of climate change. There is a growing body of scientists that do not agree. They have been suppressed by the political elite, controlling the funding of grants and research. If they do not preach the narrative, they are ostracized, receive no funding, or forced to resign. The eco-anxiety community has created a manufactured hysteria and a false crisis. False crisis leads to bad policy. We have already seen the effects: high inflation, power shortages, and world conflict. Eliminating fossil fuels entirely would have significant and wide-ranging effects on our societies, economies, and way of life. Fossil fuels currently provide a large portion of the world's energy needs. Eliminating them would require a massive, costly, and complex transition to alternative energy sources such as renewables, solar and wind, and possibly emerging technologies like advanced energy storage and hydrogen fuel cells that do not exist today. Wind and solar are not reliable sources, and would therefore require a parallel system, making energy very costly. The fossil fuel industry is a major contributor to many world economies, providing jobs and revenue. Eliminating fossil fuels could lead to economic disruption in regions heavily dependent on these industries. While renewable energy sources have lower carbon emissions compared to fossil fuels, they are not without environmental impacts. For example, the production of solar panels and wind turbines requires mining and processing of minerals, which have ecological and social consequences. A significant portion of the global population resides in developing countries. Asking them to give up fossil fuels, a low-cost, reliable energy solution that is crucial to support their economic development, and improved living conditions, is to commit them to a life of poverty, especially when the requirement is based upon politics and not science. The bottom line. Natural climate variability is the dominating factor in climate change. Extreme weather changes do not drive climate change. The observed climate changes since 1850 are linked to cyclical, predictable, naturally occurring events in Earth's solar system with little or no help from man. The eco-anxiety community's solution leads to a lower quality of life and poverty. Focusing on CO2 only oversimplifies the climate problem and the solutions. There is no CO2 emergency. The CO2 hoax is all about politics, power, money, control, and not science.